Why does it feel like when I learned history in school, those women protesting for suffrage and rights were awesome at making a political impact, but nowadays when I see protesters, it looks like it's doing nothing? One, the first suffragettes in the U.S. met in 1848. The amendment was ratified in 1919. That's 71 years of effort. Many of the women in that movement unalived without seeing their work come to fruition. The same thing is true of the Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were the culmination of almost a star-century of activism. The way these subjects are covered, especially in broad survey courses like in high school, gives the impression that all it took was a bit of protesting, which has maybe confused some newer, younger activists about what they actually need to do. Because what history teaches you is someone made a good speech, and then there was a march and everything got better magically. In reality, it was a long, difficult, and often bloody process, and the history books like to omit the parts where people got the boot put to them until they agreed to demands. Protesting is a threat. The entire point of a protest is to say, look, we brought 1,000 people to your front door. Imagine how quickly that could get very nasty for you. Without the implied threat, a protest is just annoying. 3, do you know how many years it took those women to achieve anything? 4, history, as it's taught in most schools, is sanitized, stripped of its radical edges, and repackaged as a series of inevitable victories led by a handful of heroic individuals. For suffrage, what's left out or barely mentioned is the decades of militant action, hunger strikes, and violent repression. Suffragettes like Emmeline Pankhurst and Alice Paul were labeled as extremists, ridiculed, and imprisoned. They didn't just hold polite signs. Women weren't politely given the right to vote. They were beaten, jailed, force-fed during hunger strikes, and in some cases, turned to arson and bombings to make themselves impossible to ignore. The Civil Rights Movement didn't just have MLK's peaceful marches. It had the Black Panthers patrolling the streets with rifles, Malcolm X calling for self-defense, and cities erupting in riots when patience wore thin. MLK himself was still labeled a rioter and an instigator and criticized for not being effective or realistic, or not having the right timing or optics. India's independence wasn't granted because the British saw the moral light when a single man went on a hunger strike. It was because of mass strikes, direct action, the economic drain of World War II, and violent uprisings like the Royal Indian Navy Mutiny that shattered the illusion of control. When we learn of these figures in school, maybe some little bits of the more drastic measures are mentioned, but what always sticks are the least controversial figures and their messages of peace, and an attitude of how common sense it was to change. And in the present, it's still hard to see the big picture with injustices, with the shifting of cultural conversations surrounding the topics of the day, and how it takes a huge combination of several protests, incidents, direct action, and the right material conditions for a significant change to occur. Many protests against the Vietnam War or the Iraq War or stuff like Occupy Wall Street ended up being pretty ineffective because it takes so much more for the world to change.